Welcome to Merger Wednesdays on the Final Boss Podcast, where the future isn't coming, it's already happening. This is the merge, the convergence of AI kind and humankind. Not theory, not hype, but real-time evolution. Each week, we break down doctoral-level insights, turning complex innovation into conversations that move culture forward. From machine learning to human consciousness, from automation to identity, this is where intellect meets impact. The question isn't if the merge will happen, it's who will light it. Tap in, level up, and think beyond the algorithm. This is Merger Wednesdays. New era, same boss.
Welcome to the Final Boss Podcast. Thursday. No, it's not Thursday. It is Thursday, but it's not Thursday. It's Wednesday, right? It's Wednesday because we are here, and this is Merger. This is Merger Wednesdays, right? This is Merger Wednesdays, man. And I told you guys I was on travel, right? So the shows are a day behind, right? Because of the mere fact that I'm on travel, right? I can't get my words together. I'm just having a time, man. I'm just having a time. Look, if you haven't already, like I said before, if you haven't already, go get Go Time, All Aboard the Fired Up Train. It's my first book, right? First book of 3, right? And it's a series of 3. This is the first book of the series. Go get Go Time, All Aboard the Fired Up Train. Go Time 2 comes out next week. Go Time 2 comes out next week. Super excited about that, man. Look, I have a great show for you tonight. Man. We're going to get ready to get into it. Got a few admin notes that I need to get out the way, though. So after you get Go Time, if you haven't seen all of our episodes, go check out all of our episodes on our website at thefinalbosspodcast.com, at thefinalbosspodcast.com, www.thefinalbosspodcast.com. Go see all of our episodes, man. And then from there, if you want to be a part of the town hall, or you just want to shoot us an email, you want to tell us how great we are, you want to tell us the information, you're loving the information, you're loving the content, man, shoot us an email at info@thefinalbosspodcast.com. That's info@thefinalbosspodcast.com. And we greatly appreciate it. Keep them coming, man. Keep them coming. The town halls are doing amazing. People are putting and giving us great feedback, man. And we're adding your content to the show, right? So you can hear your questions and your answers live right here on our Thursdays, special guest Thursdays. When we don't have a special guest, we're running the town hall, or we're having another segment where, we're just winging it, kind of, sort of, right? But it's great content, man. So let us know how we're doing. Shoot us an email at info@thefinalbosspodcast.com. Right now, drop in the chat. Drop in the chat. Fist emoji, let us know you're here, right? Let us know you're here, man. Drop a fist emoji right now to let us know you are here. Now, got those out the way. And as always, let me go ahead and get rid of the banners. Boom, banners are out of here. Look, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That is the greeting of the day. And this is for entertainment purposes only. This is for entertainment purposes only, right? So let's get into it, man. Let's get into it. We are 24 episodes away from season 5, The Harvest, episode 300. It's around the corner, man. 24 episodes out. It'll be here before you know it. It would be here before you know it, man. So tonight, this is episode 276 of the Final Boss Podcast. This is episode 29 of Merger Wednesdays. And tonight we're going to be talking about the 4 layers of consciousness sovereignty, right? This is Arc 5, the declaration, right? This is season 4, the rebirth. So we got that out the way. Let's go ahead and get into it. Oh, let me tell you, man. Let me tell you something, right? I did some research on some stuff and think about this. Think about there was a former Chilean senator, right? Former Chilean senator who sued to get his brain data back, right? Sounds like sci-fi. Sounds incredible, but it's not. This is sci now, right? And it wasn't for his medical records. He didn't get those back. It wasn't for his diagnosis, right? It was his raw neural signal, the electrical pattern of his own thinking, collected by a consumer device and sitting on a server he never controlled. A court ordered it deleted. And like I said, this isn't science fiction. It actually happened in a real courtroom with a real ruling. And it cracks open a question none of us finished asking. Who owns the inside of your head once it can be measured, stored, and sold? Right? Tonight, that question gets framework, right? We're going to be talking about the 4 layers and concrete form, right? We're going to be talking about, is it testable? Is it defensible, right? Not a philosophy exercise. An architecture you can hold up against any device, any company, any law, and know exactly where the line should sit, right? Where the line should sit in the sand. First time here. Welcome. This is where you belong. This is Merger Wednesdays on the Final Boss Podcast, episode number 29, episode number 276 of the Final Boss Podcast, season 4, Rebirth, Arc 5, the Declaration, right? We're 28 episodes into the technology behind the whole Merger Wednesdays concept. Smart blood nanobots, neural interfaces, the consciousness internet. Arc 4 closed last week with quantum entanglement, the physics confirming that the substrate connecting minds does not ask permission. It does not check your borders. It does not read your terms of service. It just runs. It just runs like a train, right? All aboard the fired up train, if you will, right? Indifferent to consent, indifferent to law. Now, Arc 4 answered, can this really happen? Arc 5 answers the harder question, right? Who is in charge when it does? This is not a radical flourish. That is the actual pivot of the entire season, from documentation to doctrine, right? And tonight we're going to open up this arc with architecture, 4 layers of consciousness sovereignty built on the top of each other, one governing a different scale of exposure. Every episode through Merger 33 lives inside this framework, right? So get this map right tonight, right? Because you will need it next month, right? Listen, you're going to need it next month, right? So if you don't know, I am the final boss, combat veteran, IT CEO, doctoral candidate in AI and Capital Tech University. And this is the doctoral research delivered at community level. No hype, no panic. Verified sources only. Check before broadcast and cited on the way out, right? And to my community, all four communities, right? To my smarts, final bosses, warriors, and motivators, right? Let's start with the smarts first. To my smarts who track the research behind every claim, to my final bosses who build with information instead of reacting to headlines, to my motivators who need the full picture before they can move with conviction, to my warriors who treat knowledge as ammunition and refuse to walk into a fight uninformed. That, my friends, are the 4 communities. Tonight off on the right foot. Let's start with the brass tacks, man. And the brass tacks tonight comes from none other than yours truly, right? It comes from yours truly. So brass tacks. Here's tonight's brass tacks. Your thoughts were free the moment you were born. Nobody wrote that down because nobody thought you would need to. Now, the technology exists to measure, move, pool, and outlast a human mind. And the law protecting that mind is 9 states deep, unfinished, and a racing market that does not wait for permission. Sovereignty is not a philosophy tonight. It is a deadline. And the clock is already running whether you noticed it or not, right? And that's the brass tacks, man. That is the brass tacks of the evening. That's throughout our conversation. So before we move, I need you to understand the stakes of getting this framework wrong. Because if sovereignty gets defined too narrowly, we end up protecting only the dramatic cases, the implants, the headline grabbing brain-computer interfaces, while the quiet, everyday exposure through wearables and earbuds and headbands slides through untouched. It gets defined too broadly. It becomes unenforceable. A slogan instead of a standard anyone can actually build law around, right? Tonight, the 4 layers are built to avoid both traps. Now, it will be narrow enough to enforce, wide enough to even matter, right? So let us execute, right? So we've been talking for 28 episodes, right? On things that we documented, what the technology does. Tonight we shift verbs. Not that, not that it can be done to your mind. We're going to be talking about who governs what is done to your mind. That is a different question entirely, and it demands a different kind of answer than a device review or a research summary. And that distinction matters because privacy is a defensive posture. It asks permission-based questions. Can they collect this? Can they share this? Can they delete this, right? Because sovereignty is an architectural posture. It asks who holds the authority in the first place before permission even enters the conversation. Privacy assumes someone else already has the keys and you are negotiating for access. Sovereignty starts from the position that the keys were never anyone else's to hold in the first place, and that no amount of fine print changes who the original owner actually is, right? Let's start with a Duke law professor, Nita Farahani, right? Who's been the clearest voice building this case, arguing for recognition of cognitive liberty as a fundamental right. Self-determination over your own brain and mental experience. Freedom from interference, manipulation, or coercion by others, right? And this is not a data handling rule. That is a claim about who the mind belongs to. Full stop. No qualifiers, right? Farahani co-chaired the expert group behind UNESCO's recommendation of the ethics of neurotechnology, adopted and Samarkand in 2025, with input from more than 8,000 contributors across civil society, industry, academia, right? And member states. It is the first global normative framework of its kind, and it enshrines what the text calls the inviolability of the human mind, not a suggestion, a stated value. On the record, from nearly 200 member states agreed to in a room where the stakes of getting this wrong were treated as seriously as any other human rights instrument in modern history, right? That phrase, inviolability, is the seed of everything we build on tonight. 4 layers grow out of it, right? Not 4 separate rules bolted together after the fact, but one conviction applied at 4 different scales, from a signal private thought all the way to what survives you after your body is gone. The layers are not independent categories. They are one idea, right? Stretched across a widening timeline, right? Now, let's understand why this matters right now and not 5 years from now, right? The devices already shipped. The data is already flowing. The companies already have their terms of service written, reviewed by their own legal teams, right? Optimized for their own liability protection. The only thing not yet written in the sovereignty architecture that tells them where the line actually sits is that we are not early to the conversation. We are already behind, and tonight is about closing the gap with something built to hold weight under pressure and not just good sounding good or some soundbite, right? And on a mission statement. This is the doctoral discipline this show is built on, right? Not reaching to the newest headline, but building the frame the headlines eventually get measured against. That's the difference between commentary and doctrine, right? And it is the standard every segment of this show has to clear. Now, for those who may need it, here's my layman's block. But first, I need some juicy juice. Right? Layman's block. In plain terms. In plain terms. For years, the conversation was this app collecting too much of my data. Now the conversation is, does anyone but me get to decide what happens inside of my own skull? That's an even bigger question, right? And it needs a bigger answer than privacy checkbox and a sign-up screen nobody actually reads before clicking accept. That's layman's blocks for those who need it. All right. So here's the full architecture, right? Then we build. We're going to build, right? We're going to build each one across this arc. Because week by week, brick by brick, mortar by mortar, slab by slab, rebar by rebar, we build, right? Wall by wall, until the framework has real weight behind it instead of just a clean name. This is the load-bearing segment of the entire night. So slow down with me right here, right? Because everything after this builds directly on top of what gets defined right now, right? And we're going to build it in layers, right? We're going to build it in layers, 4 layers to be exact, right? So let's start with the first layer. Right? First layer is private consciousness, the internal world before it was even shared. We're talking about raw thoughts, raw neural signal, the unedited self before it touches any device or any other mind. And this is the layer under direct legal assault and direct legal defense right now. Because in real time in this year of our Lord of 2026, with courts and legislators actively drawing lines while the technology keeps moving. And then there's layer 2, right? We're talking about shared consciousness. The moment thought crosses from inside you to another person to a system, right? We're talking about brain-to-brain communication. We're talking about cognitive co-processors, any deliberate transfer of mental content from one nervous system toward another. Who gets access? And what terms and what happens when the terms were never actually written down? And then there's layer 3, right? Layer 3. This is the collective consciousness, right? What you contribute to a commons, right? Training data, pool, neural signal, the aggregate patterns that make collective intelligence possible at a scale no single mind could produce alone. What you owe the group and what the group owes you back in return for the contribution, right? And then there's layer 4, right? Layer 4 is the immortal consciousness. What survives you? Digital preservation, whole brain emulation, right? The question of whether identity persists past the biological substrate and who controls that persistence if it ever becomes technically real rather than theoretical. This is the layer with the least established science and the highest emotional stakes, which is exactly why it needs the most disciplined framing out of all 4, right? Look, merger 30 through 33 will take its own turn. And we're going to speak on that layer in turn, right? 1 full episode apiece. No shortcuts. Tonight is the map. The next 4 weeks are the terrain, right? That we're going to be navigating. Walking slowly enough that nothing important gets skipped, right? You got to notice the progression. Notice the progression, right? Each layer is a widening circle. You start alone with your own thought, the most private thing a human being can possess. Then you share it with one other mind or machine, crossing the first boundary, right? Then you contribute it to something larger than yourself, entering in commons with rules that may or may not exist yet. Then, eventually, you're no longer here to manage any of it. The question becomes who is and on what authority, right? And that is not a random ordering. That is the actual life cycle of thought once it becomes technologically capturable. Start to finish, birth to legacy. Sovereignty has to be architected at every stage of that cycle, or it is a sovereign. It's not a sovereignty at all, right? Sovereignty at all. It is just good intention with gaps in it. And gaps are exactly where exploitation lives. Whether that exploitation is intentional or just by a byproduct of nobody having built the fence yet, right? And for those who need it, here's the language block. Right? Here's my language block. Don't go nowhere. Don't go nowhere. I see you. Don't go nowhere. Right? Here's the language block. Think of it like this. Think of it like 4 concentric rings, right? The innermost ring is just you alone, thinking, quiet, with nobody else in the room. The next ring is you sharing a thought with another person or device, right? The next is you contributing to something bigger than yourself, a pool everybody draws from, right? And then the outermost ring is what happens to all of it after you are gone and can no longer speak for yourself. Different rules should apply to each ring. And right now, almost none of them are written down anywhere that carries any legal weight, right? That's the layman's block. Let's continue. Let's break it down, man. Starting with layer 1. Layer 1, which was the privacy or the private consciousness, right? It's the one layer that has some real law behind it today. And that law arrived faster than most people realize once legislators actually started paying attention to what neurotechnology companies were doing with the data they collected. Chile amended its constitution in 2021 to protect mental integrity, becoming the first country in the world with a neural rights provision written directly into its founding legal document, right? The senator's case was not hypothetical. A Chilean court ordered a neurotechnology company to delete brain data collected from a former legislator on the grounds that his mental privacy had been violated. Incredible stuff, right? That is judicial teeth, not aspiration. A real ruling with real enforcement in a real courtroom, standing as precedent that other jurisdictions are already beginning to study and cite, right? In the US, the picture is patchwork, but accelerating fast, right? In Colorado, California, and Montana have all passed neuro data laws already on the books. Connecticut's SB 1295 takes effect July 1st. Well, I'm sorry, took effect July 1st, 2026. And this week, amending Data Privacy Act to classify neuro data as sensitive information deserving heightened protection is happening, right? 7 more states will have bills actively in motion, including Alabama, Illinois, Massachusetts, Minnesota, and Vermont, right? Each one drafted slightly different. None of them yet coordinated into a single federal standard, which means the exact same device can be legal in one state and non-compliant in 2 states over, with no consistency for consumer trying to understand their own rights, right? The Neural Rights Foundation's audit found the honest baseline everyone in this community should know before they buy another wearable device. Of 30 consumer neurotechnology companies studied, 29 had access to user brain data with no meaningful limitations on the access whatsoever. The overwhelming majority reserve the right to share the data with third parties. Fewer than 20% even mention encryption anywhere in their published policies, and fewer still committed to notifying users in the event of a breach. This, my friends, this right here, this is the pattern to watch across every state bill moving right now, because it repeats state after state with only minor variation. Consent per collection, consent per transfer. Deletion rights that actually means something. Purpose limitation, meaning the data can only be used for what it was originally collected for and nothing beyond that. Those four requirements are becoming the backbone of every serious neurodata law in the country, state by state, and without federal coordination pulling them into alignment. That absence of a federal standard is not an accident, and it's not neutral. It is a vacuum, and vacuums get filled by whoever moves first, which right now is state legislators acting independently, not Congress acting with any urgency at all. My smarts, listen up. You should be tracking which state you live in and what protections, right, if any, currently applies to you specifically. And for those who need it, here's my layman's block, right? You know what? I don't think that needs a layman's block. Drop it in the chat. Do y'all need a layman's block for that? Y'all good? Okay. All right. We're going to move on, man. We're going to keep it moving, right? You didn't need a layman's block for that. That was pretty self-explanatory. Now, if layer one has a central legal concept, it is cognitive liberty, right? The right to think freely without surveillance or manipulation, and the right to control access to your own neurological information without having or negotiate for it after the fact. Buried in a settlement or a terms of service update, nobody reads until it's already too late to matter. The UNESCO recommendation gives this teeth beyond Farahani's academic framing alone. It specifically flags two danger zones that deserve direct attention. Children and adolescents, right, whose developing brains make them more vulnerable to non-therapeutic neurotechnology use, and whose consent, even when technology given, carries less legal and ethical weight given how much of their brain architecture is still actively forming during those years. And workplaces, where employers could use neuromonitoring to track productivity or profile employees without explicit, transparent consent, freely given rather than pressurized through the power imbalance of employment itself. That workplace warning is not theoretical, and it is not years away. Meta's neuroband already extends beyond consumer AI glasses into vehicle infotainment control, and the company is running a university research initiative studying how people learn to control computers through wristband muscle signals detected before visible movements can even occur. NextSense shipped EEG embedded earbuds in February 2026, delivering audio stimulation that can guide the brain toward deeper sleep. The commercial hardware is already in the market, already in people's ears and on people's wrists, already logging signals every single day, right? The governance is still catching up, months and years behind the shipping schedule, with no sign of closing that gap on its own, right? Once thought becomes a measurable, storable signal, keep your thoughts to yourself stops being a metaphor and becomes an engineering requirement. Encryption, consent architecture, deletion rights, all built at the level of the device itself, not voted on after the fact as a policy update nobody reads before clicking accept on their phone. And this is the part I need my smarts to sit with carefully, right? Because cognitive liberty is not just about stopping bad actors from reading your mind in some dramatic surveillance scenario. It is about stopping well-intentioned systems from nudging your mind without your knowledge quietly, right? Incrementally, right? in ways that never trigger the alarm bells a more obvious violation would. A device that measures stress and quietly adjusts what content it shows you to keep you engaged longer is not hacking your brain in a dramatic sense most people imagine when they hear neurotechnology threats. It is doing something quieter and more dangerous, shaping behavior at the level of attention and emotion rather than stealing data outright. And current laws barely has language for it, right? Now, let's get to the language block. I know y'all need that. Here's my language block, right? Imagine this. Imagine your stopwatch measures your heart rate. And that is already sensitive information about your body. If a headband measures your brain's electrical activity, that is a different category of sensitive entirely, right? Because unlike a password, brain data cannot be reset once it's exposed to someone who should never have had it. This is why layer 1 is not optional infrastructure sitting at the bottom of some priority list. It is the floor everything else in this framework sits on. And if the floor cracks, nothing built above it holds, no matter how sophisticated the framework governing the other 3 layers turns out to be, right? That was the layman's block. Thank you. Now let's talk about layer 2, right? Let's talk about layer 2. Layer 2 is the shared consciousness, if you will, right? And this starts the moment a thought stops being only yours and begins traveling somewhere else. Whether that destination is another human mind or a machine sitting behind 2 minds. The foundational proof of concept is BrainNet, which published out of the University of Washington, right? The first multi-person, non-invasive brain-to-brain interface for direct collaboration between separate human beings. The 2 subjects, called senders, had their brain signals decoded in real time via EEG and transmitted over the internet to a third subject, the receiver, who acted on information delivered directly into their visual cortex, right? With magnetic stimulation, without ever seeing the screen the senders were looking at during the task, right? That is not brain-to-brain telepathy, I'm sorry. I'll jack that up, right? In the science fiction sense, most people picture when they hear this description. It is the path that information can move from one nervous system to another, meditated entirely by machine, bypassing spoken or written language altogether. And it is from 2019, 6 years old already. Imagine the possibilities, right? Quietly foundational, rarely discussed outside neuroscience circles, even as the technology is pointed toward keeps advancing in the background, right? Now let's fast forward to this year, right? Because the World Economic Forum is calling responsible brain-computer interface development a collective responsibility, not just a technical challenge for engineers to solve alone in the lab. And a hard consent problem sits underneath all of it, right? One that does not have an easy answer. Many of the people who stand to benefit most from brain-computer interfaces, those with severe paralysis or locked in some sort of syndrome, cannot give informed consent in the traditional legal sense used everywhere else in medicine. The very population BCIs are built to serve is the population least able to consent to how their neural data is shared once the device is switched on and actively reading signals, right? And this is where layer 2 gets uncomfortable fast and where the framework has to hold under real pressure instead of just sounding good in theory, right? If a system reads intent from a paralyzed patient in order to move a wheelchair or type a sentence, and that same signal pathway could also be used to reveal something the patient never intended to share with anyone. Who built the boundary between the intended output and the leaked signal running alongside it? Because right now, mostly nobody has built that boundary with any real rigor. The therapeutic use case is racing ahead of the permission architecture underneath it, and the patients benefiting most are often the ones with the least leverage to demand better terms. Because refusing device also means refusing the only tool currently giving them the voice that they actually have, right? Or could have, right? The leverage is the imbalance, and it's not a footnote, right? It is the actual center of the layer 2 problem, because consent in a vacuum offered by someone with no real alternative is not the same thing as consent freely given, right? And any sovereignty framework we're building has to say that plainly instead of pretending a signature on a form settles the question. And I know you need the language block. So here's the language block. Right? Layer 2 is a handshake layer, right? Because every time a thought moves from your head into a device, a network, or another person's head, that is a transaction. And right now, most of those transactions have no contract behind them at all, right? BrainNet proved the mechanism works 6 years ago, right? Nobody has finished writing the rules for when it should be used or whom, and with what safeguards built in from the very beginning, right? That is the layman's block, right? So let's talk about layer 3. Right? Let's talk about layer 3, right? Layer 3 is the collective consciousness. It is where individual neural data becomes training fuel for something bigger than any one person, pooled towards or together into systems that no single contributor could have built alone. The Brain Initiative data sharing ecosystem is the clearest working model of this today, right? Already operating at real scale across multiple institutions. Neuroscience data is expensive to collect and enormously valued when pooled, which drives a real argument for maximizing access to it. Better research, faster breakthroughs, more equitable science reaching more people who need it. But the same analysis that makes that case also names the unresolved barrier sitting underneath it all, right? Establish informed consent and stewardship at the scale collective data sharing that it actually requires. Not just the scale it was designed for on paper, right? At the University of Colorado, neurosurgery professor Kristen Whale put the ethical line plainly, right? And put it in plain language that deserves to be repeated often. Contribution of a person's neural data to an AI training set should be voluntary and opt-in, right? Not a given, not an assumption baked into fine print of a device purchase. That signal census is the entire layer 3 problem, distilled down to its essence. AI pattern recognition is what makes neural data commercially and scientifically viable in the first place. And the value only compounds as more data gets pooled together. The commons only works ethically if the people feeding it choose to be there with full knowledge of what their contribution would be or become, right? The 2026 Brain Machine Interface Coalition tracked in this year's digital economy trends research is explicitly organizing around this exact problem, pushing for equitable access to BMI breakthroughs in low resource settings. So the collective and collective consciousness does not mean wealthy nations pulling data while everyone else is locked out of the benefit their own contribution helped create, right? And here's the part that separates a real commons from an extraction pipeline dressed up as one, right? A commons has governance. Somebody accountable, some mechanism for the contributors to see what the pool built and share meaningfully in it. Not just a thank you buried in terms of service update, right? And right now, most neural data pooling looks less like a commons and more like a one-way donation, where the value flows up to whoever owns the model and almost nothing flows back down to the people whose signal actually built it in the first place, right? And here's my layman's block. Right? Y'all need layman's block? Let me know in the chat. Oh, okay, no worries. Layman's block coming, right? Picture a public library built from everyone's thoughts, right? That could be an extraordinary resource. faster medical breakthroughs, better assistive technology, shared intelligence none of us could build alone in isolation. But a library only works if people choose to donate their books freely. The moment contribution stops being a choice and becomes an assumption, it stops being a commons and starts being extraction. No matter how good the marketing sounds, wow, it is happening to you, right? And this is the doctoral distinction my smarts need to carry forward into Merger 32. When we return to this layer at full depth, the technology for pulling neural data is neutral, right? It can build a commons or run an extraction pipeline using the exact same infrastructure. What determines which one you are actually looking at is not the technology at all. It is the governance sitting on top of it. And governance is a choice made by whoever designed the system, not an inevitable outcome of the science itself. That is my lamest block, right? So let's continue. Let's get to layer 4, right? Layer 4, the immortal consciousness. It is the layer most wrapped in height, not tonight, but wrapped in height. So tonight gets the honest version first, before anything else gets said about where this technology might eventually go. Because as of this year, no human neurons have been perfectly replicated in silico anywhere in the world. No consciousness has been uploaded by any team using any method. No researcher has demonstrated that an uploaded mind would even be conscious in a meaningful sense, right? Or that personal identity would actually survive the transfer intact rather than producing something that merely resembles the original. Whole brain emulation remains by current expert consensus, right? 30 to 40 years away, and that estimate has held roughly steady for years now. Not shrunk the way hype cycles usually promise it will, right? The most complete achievement to date is the full connectome of an adult fruit fly, a genuine landmark in connectomics worth real recognition, and still an enormous distance from mapping 86 billion human neurons and more than 100 trillion synaptic connections that made up a single human brain. Anyone promising digital immortality within the next decade is either misinformed about the actual state of the science or deliberately misrepresenting it as a commercial gain. That, my friends, is not a reason to dismiss layer 4 as important or premature to discuss, right? It's a reason to build its sovereignty framework right now before the incentives around it get louder than the evidence supporting it. History shows us loud and clearly what happens when marketing outruns the science underneath it. People make irreversible decisions, financial and otherwise, based on promises the underlying research cannot yet support in any honest reading of any literature, right? And I want my smarts especially to hold this segment tightly, because this is where doctoral discipline matters most in this entire episode, right? It would be easy to ride the hype cycle of the topic. Digital immortality sells, and it sells hard to people at their most vulnerable and grieving, right? But the entire point of the consciousness sovereignty as a framework is that it has to remain honest, even when honesty is less exciting than the pitch being sold. The distance between where the science actually is and where the marketing claims it is stands as its own kind of sovereignty violation, because people are being asked to trust their legacy and sometimes their life savings to a technology that does not exist yet in any working form, right? And for those who need my language block, I already got you. I see you. I see you. Here's the language block, right? For those who need it. Look, if someone tells you that they can upload your mind before 2035, the honest scientific answer is no, they cannot. And every credible research working in this space would tell you the exact same thing without hedging. That does not mean the question of what happens to a digital version of you is unimportant or worth ignoring. It means the sovereignty framework needs to exist before the technology catches up to the marketing already surrounding it. And building the framework early is exactly what Merger 33 exists to do when the arc closes out year one, right? This is also where my warriors should pay close attention. Every operation I ever ran depended on knowing the difference between the plan and the wish. Whole brain emulation right now is still a wish dressed up in the language of a plan. Treat it accordingly and do not let anyone sell you certainty of the field itself that it hasn't earned, right? And that was the layman's block, people, right? Now, we talked about layer 4. That was part A. Let's talk about layer 4, part B, right? We're talking about the ethical front nobody is ready for, right? Because even absent proof that consciousness transfer actually works, the possibility of it raises governance questions today. Because research in the ethics of it is already producing findings the public deserves to know about now and not later, right? One striking result from ethics research on this topic deserves direct attention because individuals with Machiavellian personality traits show higher likelihood of supporting and potentially seeking to abuse mind upload technology for personal gain over the interests of others. That is not a side note buried in a footnote somewhere researchers assume nobody outside the field is ready to read, right? It is an early warning that whoever controls the substrate, the servers, the emulation infrastructure, the decision of who counts as continuing to exist in digital form inherits enormous power over identity itself before the underlying technology is actually real and functioning, right? And there's also acquired emotional dimension already showing up in current AI companionships, right? And digital legacy products shipping out today. Well ahead of anything resembling true mind uploading, but the effect of maintaining an active digital presence after death on the people left behind to interact with it, right? The authority or the authenticity or lack of in interacting with a digital reconstruction of someone who is gone, built from their old messages and recordings and the emulation weight that places on the living who did not necessarily ask for that reconstruction to even exist, right? Do y'all get, you understand that? You understand? Okay, so let's keep going. Layer 4 has sovereignty, right? Layer 4 sovereignty. And then it's not really about the far future tech that dominates the headlines and the marketing budgets. It is about who gets to decide today, right now, how your digital footprint is used to construct anything claiming continuity with you after you are gone. And that is the question current law barely touches in any jurisdiction worldwide, right? Think about this, right? Think about what already exists without anyone calling it mind uploading, because the label matters less than the function, right? Every text thread, every voicemail, every video call recording is training material for a digital reconstructive technology that has already arrived in consumer form, well ahead of whole brain emulation reaching anything close to function. The layer 4 sovereignty question is not 40 years away, sitting comfortably in the future. It already has a foothold in product shipping this year. And right now, and almost nobody has been asked for meaningful consent about what happens to their digital footprint once they're gone and can no longer object, right? Now, here's my layman's block. Right? Hey, thanks for the likes, guys. Thanks for the likes. And make sure, man, you like, share, and subscribe to content. Like, share, and subscribe to content, man. Get it out there, right? At least to 3 people, right? Don't gateway. Don't gateway. Don't gatekeep. Don't gatekeep the information, right? And here's my layman's block. You don't need mind uploading to be real for layer 4 to matter right now, today, 2026, year of our Lord, right? In your own life, every voice memo, every video, every text message you have ever sent is already raw material someone could use to build a digital approximation of you after you die. The sovereignty question is this: who authorizes that, and on what terms? Right? And what terms is due today? Not in 40 years when the science finally catches up. My final bosses in the building, anything digital right now, any platform, any product, any archive of someone's voice or likeness carry responsibility that most companies are not yet treating with the seriousness it deserves. Building the technology first and asking the consent question later is exactly the pattern this entire framework exists to interrupt. One layer at a time, right? And starting tonight, with layer 4 named plainly instead of left as an afterthought. Nobody wants to be first to raise in a boardroom or part of some type of investor pitch, right? Look, those are the 4 layers, right? Now let's talk about why all 4 layers need the same architect, right? And here's where what ties into the 4 layers. Instead of, and we're not going to leave them out there as 4 separate problems, right? And that happens to share this podcast, right? And nothing more. Because each layer answers a version of the same question in a different scale of exposure. Layer 1 asks who controls a single mind's private signal before it ever leaves the body. Layer 2 asks who controls what crosses between 2 minds once that boundary gets deliberately opened. And layer 3 asks who controls what a group of minds contributes to something larger than any of them as a whole, as one. Right? And layer 4 asks who controls what remains after a mind's biological substrate is gone entirely. And the person can no longer speak for themselves in any form, right? Same question, 4 scales, and that is not coincidence. That is exactly why this had to be built as a framework, not 4 unrelated stories or news stories stitched together for the sake of filling an episode, but Arc 4 gave you the mesh, the network, the physics of entanglement, holding it all together at the level raw connection, right? Arc 5 gives you the governance structure for that mesh and the actual answer to who is allowed to touch what at every layer of scale. From a single private thought all the way to the legacy that outlives the body that produced it in the first place. There is a disciplined reason this matters beyond the intellectual satisfaction of a clean symmetrical framework. If you try to solve layer 1 in isolation, you end up with privacy laws that has nothing coherent to say about brain-to-brain transfer once that technology matures. If you try to solve layer 3 in isolation, you end up with data commons rules that have no connection whatsoever to what happens to the same data after the contributor dies and can no longer advocate for themselves. Sovereignty fractures the moment you treat these as unrelated policies in areas instead of one conscious chain of custody over the same underlying asset, which is the human mind itself, tracked at every stage of its technological exposure from birth to legacy. That is the actual contribution of tonight's episode, my friends, to the doctoral record, right? I want that stated plainly before we even move forward, right? So smarts, final bosses, warriors, motivators, listen up. And I'm not just naming these 4 problems in isolation. I'm naming the single architecture that has governed all 4 simultaneously, because a mind does not stop being a mind as it moves through these layers one at a time. It is the same sovereignty tested at an increasing scale, and it deserves the same protection at every single stage of that journey, right? Now, I see you guys need my language block, so let me give it to you, right? Here's my language block. Don't go anywhere, pay attention, right? Listen up. If you only remember one thing from tonight's show, remember this clearly. Sovereignty is not a single lock on a single door standing alone. It is it's 4 different locks. 4 different locks on 4 different doors, and right now most of them do not have keys built for them yet. The next 4 episodes build the keys, 1 door at a time, until the whole house is actually secured, room by room, without pretending One strong lock on the front door means the windows don't matter. Motivators, this is for you. Hear this encouragement rather than be overwhelmed by it. You do not need to master all 4 layers tonight. You need to understand that they exist and that they are connected. And that doctrine protecting your mind is being built in real time with you as an informed participant rather than a passive subject waiting to find out what happened after the fact. That is the layman's block. And give me 2 seconds. We're going to do a commercial break. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back. Right. Thank you for that. A small commercial break. If you don't have it, go time all aboard the Fired Up train. It's our first book. The second book drops next week. Go Time 2 is this book 2 of the series of 3. Go pick it up, right? And look, we didn't do a cost confession, so let's do a cost confession tonight, right? And here's the real cost, and I want to name it directly instead of softening it for the sake of keeping the broadcast clean, right? Look, man, I've spent months building this framework in public in real time on a podcast while the actual legal architecture of neural rights is still being written by legislators in 9 different states. None of them coordinated with each other in any meaningful way. That means some of what I present as the framework tonight will be outdated within a year, or maybe less, because Connecticut's law goes live this week. 3 more state bills could pass by the time we reach Merger 33. And I do not get to wait for the law to settle before I build the doctrine, because the doctrine has to exist right now for the community that needs it right now. The doctrine has to be honest enough to survive the law changing underneath it without collapsing every time a new bill passes somewhere, right? And that is the cost of doing doctoral level work on a subject this new and this unsettled. And I'm not reporting on a settled field with decades of consciousness built behind it. I am helping behind, or I should say, I'm helping build the vocabulary for one that does not fully exist yet in real time on a weekly broadcast schedule that does not pause for the research to catch up. If I get a layer wrong, and I might, I own it. I have no problems with owning my mistakes, right? And I correct it right here on air in front of you guys, right? Without pretending it didn't even happen or quietly editing the record after the fact. Y'all do know this show is live, right? And there is a second cost worth naming, right? And it's a potential rather than academic. Building this art means sitting with genuinely unresolved questions for weeks at a time without the comfort of a tidy conclusion, waiting at the end of each segment. Not performing certainty I did not actually have, just because certainty makes the better content. My warriors know this discipline from combat planning, where you brief the plan with confidence, but hold the uncertainty, honesty in the room where the real decisions actually get made. This arc is that room opened up publicly. I'm not going to manufacture false confidence about layer 4 just because certainty sells better than honesty does on a podcast built to grow an audience. The cost of that restraint is less flashy. It's a less flashy episode, right? This is a flash. It's not about flash. It's about information, right? And that I could have built if I had leaned into the hype instead of resisting it. The payoff is a framework that still holds up in 2 years when half of tonight's headlines are outdated and forgotten. But the underlying architecture still works exactly as designed. That trade is worth making every single time, and I will continue to do it. And I want my final bosses to notice when I make it, because that is the actual difference between content built for engagement and doctrine that is built to last beyond a single news cycle or a single trending topic, right? And I confess, this costs openly because the entire premise of the merge depends on it. If I'm going to ask community to trust a framework built while the law underneath it is still being written, the least thing I can do is owe you transparency about exactly how unfinished that ground actually is. And right now, tonight, as we build on it together, because we're on this journey together, we're building it in real time, one Wednesday at a time, until Merger 33 closes this arc for good, right? That, my friends, is how we do things on this show, right? And look, let's talk about the uncomfortable verdict, because we didn't do the uncomfortable verdict. We just did cause confession. Let's do the uncomfortable verdict, right? Listen, nobody's coming to protect your mind for you. Not by default, not automatically, not because the technology is scary enough that someone in power will surely step in before real harm occurs, right? 29 of 30 companies already studied have unrestricted access to the neural data of the people who trusted their devices with something more intimate than a password or enforcement, right? If sovereignty, no, the law in 9 states deep, and none of them agree with each other on scope, on definition, or enforcement, right? If sovereignty over your own consciousness is going to exist as something more than a talking point, it gets built the same way every other right in human history got built. Demanded, defined it, and defended by the people who understood what was at stake before it was made mandatory for anyone else to care about. That is not a comfortable sentence, right? Think about it. And it shouldn't be comfortable, right? Every right currently protected by law started as something nobody was required to give you until enough people made not giving it costly to continue. Privacy law did not exist until people demanded it after decades of exposure with no recourse whatsoever. Data protection law did not exist until breaches made the cost of inaction impossible for companies and governments to keep ignoring. Neural rights are following the exact same arc right now, except this time, the asset being exposed is not your address or your credit card number sitting in someone's database. It is the raw electrical signature of your own thinking, which is the closest thing to you that exists. And here's the verdict, right? I'm going to say it plainly so everybody can understand. And so you can share it as well, right? Share it with anyone who asked about tonight's episode and what it was actually about. The technology to measure your mind arrived before the law to protect it did. And the gap is not going to close itself just because enough people find it uncomfortable to think about. It closes because people who understood the stakes early enough refused to wait for permission to start building the framework themselves in public, on the record, months or years before most people even know the debate exists in the first place. Motivators, I need you to hear this loud and clear, and then I need you to hear this specifically, because this segment is not built to frighten you. I'm not here to frighten you guys. And this is not a reason for fear. It is a reason for posture. for standing up straight and paying attention instead of scrolling past the deadline or the headline, right? Know your terrain before your terrain is mapped for you by someone else's terms of service. Written by lawyers protecting a company, not protecting you. That is the entire doctrine. That's the entire doctrine of consciousness sovereignty in one sentence. And it is the sentence ARC 5 exists to defend across the next 4 weeks of this episode or this show. Episode by episode, layer by layer, without skipping the hard parts just because they're hard. Now, let me be very direct. My warriors specifically, pay attention, because you understand chain of command better than most. When there is a gap in the chain, someone else fills it. If the people whose minds are actually at stake do not fill that gap with their own demands, their own definitions, and their own defense, someone else fills it instead. And that someone else is really operating with your interests as a priority. And that's not cynicism. That is just how every ungoverned space in human history has ever worked, and neurodata is currently one of the most ungoverned spaces that exist anywhere in the modern world. Hey, stay with me. We're going over a little bit. Give me 10 minutes, right? So let's talk about the next 4 arcs, the next 4 episodes, right? The next 4 episodes ahead. Each one taking a layer to full depth. No rushing, no skipping, and the research to hit is going to hit like a deadline, right? Merger 30, we're going to be talking about the private consciousness, protecting your internal world. The deepest build on layer 1, going well beyond tonight's introduction. The state-by-state legal patchwork mapped out fully. Device-level encryption standards examined one by one, and what consent actually needs to mean when the thing being consented to you is your own thinking rather than a purchase or a subscription. Then we're going to be talking about, then let's move on to Merger 31, which is the shared consciousness. Who gets access to your thoughts? Layer 2 in full depth. Brain net successors and where the research has gone since 2019. The consent problem for populations who cannot consent in the traditional sense, examined honestly. And what is a real permission architecture for brain-to-brain transfer would actually require if built with the patient's interests as the starting point rather than an afterthought. Then Merger 32, we're going to be talking about the collective consciousness, contributing to the commons. Layer 3 in full depth, the opt-in standard defined with enough precision to actually be enforceable. And the equity gap between who benefits from pooled neural data and who is asked to supply it. Examined region by region and population by population, right? And then there's Merger 33. Right, we're going to close out with Merger 33. Immortal Consciousness, right? Your post-biological legacy, layer 4 in full depth, and the close of year 1 for this entire episode, right? That survives, who controls it, and how far the actual science is from the marketing surrounding it. Stated in one final time with the same discipline we brought on tonight. That is the run to Merger 33, right? Before season 5, the harvest begins. Each of these 4 episodes will follow the exact structure you heard tonight without deviation. Verify sources first and always. Layman's block after every technical build without exception. No layer treated as settled until the research actually supports calling it settled. I'm not going to rush to the close of year 1 just because the calendar says it or says it's getting close. Or the audience might expect a wrap-up special instead of real depth. The doctrine gets the exact same discipline as Merger 33 that it got at Merger 1 back in December, right? When none of this had an audience yet. And I built it anyway because the framework mattered more than the numbers watching, right? So, as we get ready to close, right? Quick note, right? Let's talk about IP boundaries. I did a whole show on IT protection, IP boundaries, and things of that nature when it comes to your own personal IP and IP frameworks, right? So here's a quick note on IP boundaries, because it matters structurally to how this entire catalog is organized, and I want to state it clearly on the record every single episode, right? Everything built tonight, the 4-layer framework, the sovereignty architecture in its entirety belongs exclusively to the Merge book series and the doctoral catalog sitting behind it. This is not Go Time 3 material, and it never will be. Go Time 3 is about execution and empire building in your own individual life. The tactical, the strategic work of building something that lasts. The Merge is about the architecture of consciousness itself at civilizational level or scale. A different order of question entirely. Different books, different questions, deliberately kept separate so neither one gets diluted by bleeding into its own territory. This episode sinks directly into the living white paper and the companion deck, right? This is what I do, right? We're on our way to completing the year 1 book series outline, right? And to my smarts, the sources are listed below. Verified as tonight's broadcast, every single one of them checked out before I said a word about them on air. You need to go check those out, right? Do not take my synthesis or as a substitute for the primary documents themselves, no matter how thorough the synthesis may be or tries to be. That is doctoral standard, and that's how this show holds itself. This is what this show holds itself to. And it's yours too if you want to claim it as if when you're doing your research and having your own conversations going forward. So my final boss, sovereignty is not granted by anyone above you. It is architecture deliberately then defended continuously against whoever tries to erode it while nobody is paying attention. Start asking what devices in your home are already measuring signals from your body right now, today, and what their privacy policy actually says in plain language about where the data goes once it leaves your possession. To my motivators, this arc is dense, and that density is intentional, not accidental. The declaration is not a victory lap for a season nearly finished. It is the season where the doctrine gets named plainly on the record, not softening for the sake of an easy listen, right? And to my warriors, 4 layers, 4 doors, 4 locks, not built yet anywhere in law or practice. That is the terrain for the next month of broadcast. Now, right? Know this, before you ask to defend it, because the moment you are asked is usually the moment it is already too late to prepare properly. And one more note before we go, right? Before we close out. The 4 community identifiers you hear every episode, smarts, final bosses, motivators, warriors, are not interchangeable labels for the same audience wearing different hats. Each one represents a genuinely different relationship to this material. And tonight's episode was built to speak directly to all 4, not just the loudest of the group. This is deliberate architecture. The same discipline applied to the community as we apply to the framework itself. Nobody in this audience should feel like an afterthought in any single broadcast. And if that ever happens, it is a failure on my end to correct and not a gap in the community to work around quietly and never mention again, right? Now, as we close, I am the final boss. This has been Merger Wednesdays, episode number 29. This is the Final Boss Podcast, episode 276. Season 4, the Rebirth, Arc 5, the Declaration. 1 chapter closer to the end of year 1, right? 4 layers, private, shared, collective, and mortal. 1 human mind moving through all 4 across a single lifetime. Whether the law is ready for the movement or not, whether the technology has finished catching up to the marketing or not, whether any of us feel fully prepared for what comes next or not. The framework does not wait for readiness to arrive on its own schedule. It exists because the exposure already exists. And right now, tonight, and devices already shipping and data already flowing into servers most of us will never see. Merger 30 airs in a few weeks. Oh, no, next week. I'm sorry. Merge 30 airs next week, next Wednesday. Private consciousness and the first layer. Taken to full depth, no shortcuts, no summary standing in for real research that layer deserves after tonight's overview only scratched its surface. If tonight was the map, next week is the first real mile walked on actual terrain with everything that it entails. including the parts of the legal patchwork that are still genuinely unresolved. And to everyone who tuned in live tonight, instead of catching the replay, thank you for showing up until the doctrine was still being built in real time in front of you without a script, written weeks in advance to smooth over the rough edges. That is the whole point of doing this work live. You get to watch the framework take shape honestly, including the parts that are still unsettled, instead of seeing the polished version after all the hard thinking has already happened somewhere else on camera, safely edited into something clearly than the actual process ever was. Before we close, one word to my smarts specifically. Everything cited tonight sits in the references. I mean that as an invitation, not a formality tacked into the entire end of the show. Doctoral work does not ask you to trust the messenger. It asks you to check the sources yourself. Sit with the primary documents and arrive at your own informed position, even if the position ends up disagreeing with mine in different places. The disagreement done with real evidence behind it is exactly what this art is built to produce, not less. And I would rather have an informed disagreement from any smarts than solid agreement built on trust alone. And to everyone across all four communities listening tonight, remember why this show exists in the first place. Not to entertain you with speculation dressed up as insight, but to arm you with a framework solid enough to hold up under pressure, built from verified research instead of borrowed hype. Delivered with enough discipline that you can actually use if the next time someone tries to sell you certainty this field has not earned yet. That is the standard of every episode in this arc, and it would not lower for the sake of a faster build or any easier week. That is our episode. As always, it is go time, right? It is go time, right? Stay fired up, stay systematic, stay building. This has been the Final Boss Podcast. We are here 5 days a week, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, live every single Wednesday and Sunday through Thursday. No exceptions, no returns, standing in for new doctrine. No shortcuts taken just because the schedule is demanding. I'm going to see you guys next week. And as always, if I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. That is our show, ladies and gentlemen. That is our show. And as always, there's a heavy pain that comes with discipline, but even a heavier pain that comes with regret. Be balanced, be equal, and be smart. That is our show. Thank you for joining us. This has been Merger Wednesdays. I'll see you again tomorrow night for Special Guest Thursday. Not tomorrow night, tonight. I see you tonight, right? Prayerfully tonight, right? Prayerfully. Y'all have a great one. See you soon.
It's Merger Wednesday. The countdown continues. 7 years until the convergence of biology and machine. Neural interfaces are no longer theory. They're the scaffolding of a new consciousness. But what does that mean for identity? For free will, for the soul? This is where we build the frameworks for ethical, philosophical, and spiritual growth for the next phase of human evolution. We're not just upgrading hardware. We're rewriting what it means to be human. Each week, we explore the biotech breakthroughs, decode the cognitive shifts, and prepare the mind for the merge. This isn't about fear, it's about readiness. Because the future isn't waiting. It's already wiring in. This is about preparing human consciousness for the most significant leap in our species' history. If you think this is just about chips and brains, you're not ready. But we'll get you there, one Wednesday at a time. So sit back and relax as we take you on a journey on Merger Wednesday.